This is Power in Politics. I'm Karina Roman in Ottawa. Calls are growing louder from Canada's canola industry. Farmers are seeking emergency aid from the federal government now that even more massive Chinese tariffs have taken hold. We've got Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe standing by to tell us about the impact on his province. And Russia is further diminishing hope of an end to its war on Ukraine, in spite of renewed efforts from U.S. and European leaders. Coming up, a former Ukrainian prime minister says it's a standard Russian game and the international community must stop playing it. And Pierre Palev is back on the pitcher's mound as official opposition leader, but he's not throwing any curveballs.
Where are Mark Carney's elbows these days? Crime up, inflation up, the deficit up, and elbows down. Mark Carney is one walking, talking, broken promise.
Palev just won a new seat to return to Parliament this fall. Will he deploy the same strategy? The Power panel is here for that debate. Power in Politics starts right now. Canadian canola farmers are feeling the blow of Chinese tariffs. China slapped a duty of nearly 76% on canola seed. This came into effect last Thursday. That's in addition to the 100% tariff on canola oil and canola meal imposed this March. China's move is seen as a response to Canada's tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. So far, the federal government has not announced any help for canola farmers.
This is not a choice between one or the other. The question is, we will be there to support our canola industry. We will be there to support our farmers. And I know that the Prime Minister and the Minister of Agriculture have been working together to address this issue.
Scott Moe is the Premier of Saskatchewan. Welcome, Premier. Let's start with this nearly 76% tariff on canola seed that's hitting right before harvest. How significant is that compared to the magnitude of the previous 100% tariff already underway from China on canola oil and meal, that tariff that hit in March?
I would say it's extremely significant because it's additive to everything that is in place right now. Listen, our largest market for canola oil seed and meal is the United States of America. Our second largest market is China. We have, uncertainty at the very least, and 100% tariffs on oil and meal going into China now. And now this is added to that. It's not in place, it's added to that. So it's very, very significant to producers, to exporters, and I would say to Canadians as a whole in an industry that employs 200,000 people.
So Beijing, of course, they claim that this is the result, that they're doing this because Canada is dumping cheap canola into their market. That's not obviously what's widely believed to be the reason, but what do you make of their claim?
Well, it's not the reason. But what we need to do is, as a province, and I would say as a nation, is to sit down with the leaders in China and to forge a path forward, not only for the canola industry, or not even only for the ag industry or the seafood industry as well as impacted by some of these tariffs, but I think for our broader trade relationship with China. China is a growing market. It's often a premium market, and they're increasing the things that they buy. And as we diversify, some of our additional production away from maybe places like the United States, China needs to be a viable option. And so we need to be in China. I've committed to going in the next number of weeks. I'm inviting the Prime Minister and federal ministers along, as ultimately, if we are going to advance that conversation, it needs to be a nation-to-nation conversation, and we would be there in a supportive role.
Well, I presume that part of that conversation will be about what the real reason is, if that conversation happens, and that is Canada's tariff, 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. And Mélanie Joly, the industry minister, says that support for electric vehicles and canola is not a choice between one or the other. So what's your sense of, if you were to have conversations with China and the Prime Minister was going to be there, about the government's urgency to help canola farmers when it has to also think about the other industries that are tied up in this?
Yeah, and they also have to, the federal government has to represent what is creating wealth for Canadians and what is employing 200,000 Canadians today, and that's the canola industry. It's a $45 billion industry, dwarfing any semblance of an EV industry that we have. And listen, with respect to whether it's the EV conversation or what that might be, we need to be sitting in front of our trading partner in China, advancing the whole of the conversation on what we are going to have with respect to market access for ag products, for other products as well, moving forward. And EVs and the 100% tariff that we put on, and to really align us with U.S. trade policy. I think we're all aware of that. That's a card. That is a card that we, as Canadians, will have to look at some point in time, quite likely. But that isn't the only card that we have. Saskatchewan and Canada are long-term, sustainable, reliable suppliers of a number of different products, not just canola seeds, oil, and meal to China. So we need to get there. We need to at least start the conversation. Right now, these tariffs are temporary, and we can't let them become permanent without getting in front of the Chinese leaders and the Chinese government. So I'm asking the federal government to engage in that nation-to-nation conversation, and committing to going myself to support that conversation happening.
In terms of other premiers also calling for action, Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew wants Ottawa to use the money that, even if it's a temporary tariff, but the money from the Chinese EV tariff that we have on to help canola producers with monetary and other supports. Is that something you would get behind as well?
Well, we have to be very careful, because there's direct and indirect actions that can happen. And our largest trading partner is the United States of America, and we need that market as well. And so we have to be, sensitive and aware to what any indirect, consequences or action of financial supports may be in this space. I would say that if we can gain market access to both the United States and China for our canola products, and no support would be needed. And that's our primary goal right now. We have likely a 6 or 8 week window where this tariff is a temporary tariff in China. I think we should do our level best to have it removed, use the cards that we have to ensure that we're, engaging in that conversation to have it removed. And then there won't be any support that is necessary. We'll have market access. That's what canola producers want, what exporters want. And I would hope that's what Canadians want as well.
Now, last week, the show talked to the Canadian Canola Growers Association. Rick White, the CEO, said that this is a political problem that requires a political solution, that going through the whole WTO process is not quick enough to deal with this. Do you have any hope that this could be resolved quickly, and these will be short temporary tariffs as opposed to long-standing ones? He pointed to the barley situation in Australia, and that went on for 3 years. So what are your hopes there?
I agree with Rick, and that's all the more reason for politicians to find their way to China and to make every effort. And I don't know how it'll turn out, but make every effort to have the conversation with a significant trading partner of ours, in particular when it comes to the conversation around the canola space. I would hope, and I think they'd be receptive if the Prime Minister was to show up with a premier or two, supporting Canada's position. And I'd hope we'd be able to advance the conversation to, a place that's good for everyone. That's my hope. We'll deal with things as they transpire. But, I firmly believe we have 6 to 8 weeks here to, make an impression and at least make an attempt to represent Canadians and represent 200,000 Canadians that work directly in the canola industry, and many more indirectly.
Do you have any sense from the Prime Minister? Have you heard from the Prime Minister on whether he's open to such a trip?
Yeah, we've been engaged with not only Prime Minister Carney, but his Parliamentary Secretary, Cody Blah, the Minister of Agriculture, and a number of other ministers, not only on the China file, trade file, but also the United States of America trade file, as they are linked, as we can see with some of the political consequences. In particular, I think in Saskatchewan, we're seeing that. They've been engaged, and I commend the Prime Minister for prioritizing and meeting with the Prime Minister of China and finding his way to ultimately the meeting that has to happen, which is President Xi. And we want to do everything we can to, further prioritize and intensify the efforts for that meeting to happen in the next number of weeks. It needs to happen in the next number of weeks in order, for us to find a path forward with our second largest trading partner when it comes to our province. And I think a trading partner where there's additional opportunities in the future for all Canadians.
Premier Moe, thank you very much for your time today.
Hey, thank you, Karina. I appreciate it.
Russia continues to bombard Ukraine with drone strikes. Has the diplomatic push to end the war made any difference? Coming up, we'll ask a former Ukrainian Prime Minister what needs to happen next. Russia is criticizing a diplomatic push by NATO leaders to end the war in Ukraine.
Наблюдаем все более четкое понимание нашими.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called recent talks at the White House a clumsy effort to sway U.S. President Donald Trump. Lavrov said discussions on Ukraine security guarantees were a road to nowhere without Russia's involvement at the table. That as Russia continues to strike Ukraine. Russia launched 15 drones in the Sumy region of Ukraine overnight. Ukraine says at least 14 people, including a family with 3 children, were wounded in the attack. Arseniy Yatsenyuk is the former Prime Minister of Ukraine. He joins me now. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Karina.
So, recent talks between European and NATO allies with Zelensky have not deterred Russia's bombardments of Ukraine at all. What does that tell you about whether anything has really changed with this latest diplomatic push?
Well, you're absolutely right. Russia is not eager to stop. So Putin wants to take over an entire Ukraine. But the good thing is that, look, the optics in DC was really good. It's completely different rather than this notorious dressing down situation that happened a few months ago between President Zelensky and President Trump. My gut feeling is that Americans are again back on board. And this was a kind of unprecedented event. I can't remember this kind of magnitude that the world has witnessed. It was a kind of summit of the free world that happened in the Oval Office. So this is the good news. But it's all about deliverables and clear-cut actions. And actions are really needed. So right now, I hope that we are on the same page. And we need to hammer out, I mean, we as a free world, to hammer out our negotiating position. In what way we are ready to get durable, fair, and just peace.
Well, let's talk about those deliverables, because obviously there's been a lot of talk, especially from Donald Trump, about getting a meeting between, either bilaterally between Zelensky and Putin, or between having Trump there as well. But now we have Russia's foreign minister is out today downplaying the idea of a bilateral meeting anytime soon. He said there needs to be work done before the two can meet. So what do you think of the chances are that that meeting will ever happen?
Well, nothing new on the Russian side. They are dragging their feet. They want to cheat us and deceive, period. So nothing has changed. The only thing they're going to do, they're going to, as they already told, they're going to raise the level of negotiators. As of now, they have no name negotiators. So we expect to see some kind of so-called high-level negotiators from the Russian rubber stamper house. So it could be, I missed the name of this lady, who is the chair of the Russian House, or something else. But whether they are in the driver's seat, whether they are decision makers, no. There is only one person in Russia who really makes the decision. This is the designated war criminal Putin. And he has already made the decision to cheat and to play for time, and not actually to overpress on President Trump. Not to show to President Trump that he is ready for some kind of sham talks in order to postpone the momentum. When President Trump decides to impose severe sanctions and provide Ukraine with a security supplement, with the new security aid package. That's the reason why Russians are playing this game.
But and so far we've seen that the U.S. and Donald Trump is not really willing to force a peace deal or any kind of consequences for ragging the puck, for dragging its feet in terms of Russia. So where does that leave Ukraine if we're so dependent on a strong U.S. and the U.S. actually putting pressure on Russia? And if that's not happening, where does that leave Ukraine?
I hope that President Trump will never allow designated war criminal Putin to humiliate him and to outplay him. Because, it's going to be it's going to have disastrous consequences, both for President Trump and for his legacy and for the United States of America. For the time being, he's trying to do his best as a deal maker to meet with Putin to get some kind of concessions, and that's the reason why he decided to roll out the red carpet for Putin. But he didn't get these concessions right now, and he's still in the waiting room. But if the time runs out, once again, I hope that President Trump and the entire free world will do their best and will do what is needed to press it like hell on Russia. That's the only language Putin and Russia understands.
Now, you mentioned concessions. Obviously, we so far have very well seen where both sides, but especially Russia, not at all seeming willing to make any concessions. Is there a concession that Ukraine can make that would get us closer to a deal, or is that also just not possible?
Well, here is the thing. There are a lot of deliberations over different types of concessions on the Ukrainian side. But I'm just wondering, what type of and kind of concession Russia is ready to make? So the more we have this kind of cheap talk about Ukraine's concessions, the higher appetite Russia has for swallowing an entire Ukraine. It is crystal clear. So in my humble opinion, we need to stop this kind of cheap talk about Ukraine's concessions. We need to unfold and to present a joint negotiating position of the entire free world to the Russian Federation with a clear-cut action plan, the way to unfold the way we are ready to cut the peace deal, to show our priorities and to show the way we're going to negotiate. Otherwise, we are just playing the Russian game. Because they ask for some kind of concessions. We say, okay, look, we are ready to liberate over these concessions. They say, that's not enough. This is it's a copycat approach that Soviets did a few decades ago. Notorious Soviet Minister of Foreign Affairs, Gromyko. Ask more, never accept anything, be a warmonger, and you'll get everything. So we are not allowed to play this game. So let's make Russia to play our game, not vice versa.
Do you think that Donald Trump understands that that's what needs to happen? He does seem to say that he believes that Vladimir Putin wants peace, if not a ceasefire, then a peace deal. Now he has since then said, oh, maybe he doesn't want peace. But so far, it doesn't seem like Donald Trump sees Vladimir Putin in the same way that Ukraine does, or doesn't have the same viewpoint. As long as that's the case, can you expect the game to be changed so that instead of playing Russia's game, it's coming from a position of strength from the other side?
Well, let me reiterate once again. President Trump did his best in order somehow to get Russia closer to the negotiating table. But as of now, Putin is not eager to act in a good faith. And I am not in the position to answer what is the President Trump perception of what's happening right now. But let me underline that this war that Putin waged against Ukraine, this is the war against the entire free world and mainly against the United States. So he has very broad strategic goals, both to undermine NATO, to fragment the European Union, and to be a close ally with China and another dictatorship and autocratic countries. So this is the threat to the national security of the United States of America. And I strongly believe that the US establishment clearly understands and realizes this.
We have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Former Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk.
Take care.
A new report has found Canada is seeing a bit of a home construction boom, but in one province, it's a bust. And it's a pretty critical province. That story next. Canada is in a race to get more homes built as the country faces a major housing crunch. But a new report suggests that one province may be lagging badly behind the others. According to RBC, nationwide home construction is actually at a 4-year high. But in Ontario, there has been a steep drop in housing starts since last year, especially in the Greater Toronto Area, one of the regions in most dire need of housing. So what's going on? We are joined by the report's author, Robert Hogue, RBC's assistant chief economist. Welcome to the show. Now, Mr. Hogue, there is a belief that housing starts are lagging across the country, but your report says for the most part that's not the case. Why is there this discrepancy?
Well, there's some very significant regional differences. In most of Canada, housing starts have been pretty strong so far this year. That's on the heels of very strong starts over the past 4 years. However, housing starts in Ontario have been very soft and have been softening. And in fact, they've reached the lowest level in 10 years on a 6 months annual average basis. And in BC as well, things are a little bit soft there as well, not quite as soft as they are in Ontario. So the overall picture still looks fairly robust in terms of, from a historical perspective, still probably not sufficient to meet all the demand that's out there, but really Ontario is really lagging the rest of Canada on that basis.
I think many would find that surprising, especially since we hear from the Premier that there's all these cranes in the air in Toronto, for example, and across the province. So what is going on in Ontario and, as you said, to a lesser extent in British Columbia?
Right, but let's make a distinction here. So yes, there are many cranes in the skyline. They're working on existing projects. What we're talking about is new housing, so housing starts. And those have slowed down quite significantly. Well, however, the number of homes under construction is still very robust in the Toronto area. The problem with new starts is that for developers, they're having a very hard time selling new projects because they can only sell at certain price points that currently the demand is just not there. Investors are not interested in current price points. At the time where in the existing market, especially in the condo market in the GTA, buyers can find readily available units and sometimes cheaper. So that is really kind of slowing down the launch of new projects and indeed slowing down the actual housing starts.
So what needs to happen to change this trajectory?
Right. Well, if you talk to developers, they would love to see lower costs. I mean, there are certain things they can't really change that much. The land prices are coming down to a certain extent, but that's not easy to do. Cost of materials, labors, it's more or less fixed. There might be a little bit of leeway there to get them down, but really it's on all the charges, like governmental related charges, whether development charges or other fees, the process to get projects approved that are really kind of weighing. So if they can get some improvement on that front, costs coming down, that will help kind of lower price points and entice more buyers to get in the market, particularly for investors, for example, condo investors.
And if it's not turned around, particularly if we're talking about the country's most populous province, or provinces, if you include BC, what does this all mean for the housing affordability crisis?
Right. In the very near term, what we have is, there's lots, like I said, there's lots of condos available in the GTA or even Vancouver market right now, in the existing market. So what we're talking about housing starts and their impact on housing affordability is not immediate. It will. The risk is that it might push home costs higher in the longer run once the current inventory of homes gets absorbed by the market, once demographic demand, like when population starts growing faster a few years down the road. That's kind of the nexus in time that we worry about. This is when you might see essentially no new housing completed at that time in those markets when demand is going to pick up again. And this is where the improvement that we've seen over the past year in terms of housing affordability that is likely to continue a little bit over the near term. but might start to get reversed at that point. That's the big question mark, the big worry for us at this stage.
I see. Now, you mentioned, and your report mentions, that there's this larger supply of readily available homes in Ontario, and that actually is a problem and not necessarily having a positive effect on housing affordability. But doesn't having that readily supply mean that it's a buyer's market and prices should be coming down?
And they are. It is having an effect on the market. And we've seen prices, condo prices in particular, but other prices for other types of housing as well in the GTA coming down, in Vancouver to a certain extent as well. So the current situation is contributing to an improvement in affordability. Mind you, the starting point was the worst ever. So over the past year, lower interest rate plus drops in home prices, moderate ones, but nonetheless drops in prices help affordability. In our view, that's likely to continue a little bit through the rest of this year, maybe early next year. Again, the bigger worry is more down the road in a few years' time, when this lull in new starts today will materialize in lower completions, therefore weaker growth in the housing stock at the time when demand is likely to pick up, like from a demographics perspective.
Yeah, so what you've described is sort of almost like a bottleneck that will have repercussions down the road. And I wonder what that means for the federal government's plan to double construction starts to 500,000 homes a year. Is that even conceivable?
Well, it would certainly will be an uphill battle, especially more specifically in Ontario in that context, because for a lot of that increase from a federal perspective has to come from Ontario, one, but two, also from the private sector. And this is where, in the condo segment, for example, more specifically, this is where things are jammed right now. It's in a stalemate. Buyers, we know there's a lot of pent-up demand, but that pent-up demand is going to get triggered when price points would come down low enough. However, developers and builders right now are stuck. They can't really. Now they're dealing with very high costs and costs that have risen quite significantly in recent years, and so they're not able to meet those price points. So really, that's kind of to get the federal government or any government plans to get that to unlock this. It's going to be an uphill battle.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time today. Robert Hogue is RBC's Assistant Chief Economist. As Pierre Palev prepares to return to Parliament as opposition leader, he is also preparing his lines of attack against the Prime Minister. The Power Panel joins me to talk about Palev's strategy for the fall sitting. Stay right there. Conservative leader Pierre Palev regained a seat in the House of Commons this week. On Monday, he won a federal by-election in the Alberta riding of Battle River Crowfoot. And in his victory speech, he signaled a potential shift in strategy for the upcoming fall sitting.
We will work with anyone from any party. We continue to extend our hand to Mr. Carney and say that we want to work with any party to put an end to the tariffs and get a fair deal for Canada. In fact, we're proposing solutions, nonpartisan solutions, that will help strengthen Canada's hand.
Well, today that collaborative tone shifted back, with Palev leveling some familiar jabs at the Prime Minister.
Mark Carney, while he made grand promises of change, he's even worse than Justin Trudeau. Where are Mark Carney's elbows these days? He seems to have misplaced them. The incompetence that you have to have as a Prime Minister to name such terrible ministers would be laughable if it weren't so terrifying. Carney is one walking, talking, broken promise.
What leader of the official opposition can we expect when MPs return to Parliament? Let's talk about that with the Power Panel. Stevie O'Brien is a former Chief of Staff to Liberal Cabinet Ministers. Sherelle Evelyn is the Managing Editor of the Hill Times. And Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Welcome all. Tim, I'm going to start with you.
I'm shocked by that, Karina.
Are you? Are you? I'm not. Was the talk of non-partisan willingness to extend a hand to the Prime Minister, Carney, was that post-victory glow on Monday night? Because today we're hearing a very different, or an old-style Palev when he talks about the walking, talking, broken promise. So what are we seeing? Who is he?
Well, he also made those comments, I think, on the general election night, that he'd work with the Prime Minister. Look, being the leader of the opposition is kind of managing Jekyll and Hyde all in one, all inside yourself. And I think Pierre Palev is going to have to figure out how that works, because there is part of the people who support Pierre Palev who do not want him to cease on the blunt instrument critique of the Liberal Party. There's a whole other part of both the Conservative Party and the country that like the election night message and like the by-election night message, which is, look, let's focus on the serious issues at hand. I think he's going to continue to try and find his feet on these things because he needs to. He needs to find his feet here. I think the risk for the Conservatives, Karina, is to fall back into the pattern they were in with Justin Trudeau. Just assuming that people would grow tired of the Liberals and of the person, and all of a sudden the opportunity would be theirs. We still seem to be in a moment whereby we are dealing with the President of the United States, who's unpredictable, who's wieldy, who Canadians have vested Mark Carney with the opportunity to deal with him. That doesn't mean he can't criticize Mark Carney, doesn't mean he shouldn't criticize Mark Carney, but I think he's going to have to work on the tonality of that. Isn't that a great Ottawa word, the tonality?
Love it. Stevie, I wanted to ask, is it just that he can't help himself, or is this a strategy that we're seeing today?
I'm probably not the only Liberal whose stomach kind of lurched when we start hearing those sorts of slogans and attacks and repetitive, more of the same Palev. I think he can't help himself. I think it is not good strategy to go to what didn't work during the election to beat on the same horse. I think if there's ever a time to be collaborative and to work together in a bipartisan way, would be at the beginning of a mandate when there's a national crisis. He can build a lot of goodwill this way. I don't think the critiques of Carney ring as true as maybe the critiques of Trudeau did. And so I think he hurts his own credibility when he makes such, when his statements come down, they're not authentic.
Sherelle, what did you think when you saw his appearance today and his speech, and then how he answered questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everybody thought that, okay, that shift in tone that he'd been talking about, or we were wondering if it was going to be coming, it's not really there. Because yes, after the election in April, and after, just on Monday night, he was talking about being more collaborative. And even today as well, he was saying, to give him, some credit, he said again that we're not just going to be opposing. He said we're going to propose solutions, which is something that people have been asking for. They say we don't want to just hear negativity, we want to hear you come up with something. To say that it's nonpartisan solutions and things like that, I think that's going a step too far, because it is clearly just the things that the Conservative Party wants to see in terms of repealing certain natural resource regulations and laws having to do with getting oil across the country and out to market. And, all of these projects are going to fall into everybody's lap as soon as that happens, because if he was Prime Minister, as he said today, he'd be negotiating with the United States President from a position of strength, because he would have done all these things already. And, in 6 months, Carney has made things worse. I don't know if that's necessarily the message people want to hear, but it is also capitalizing on the fact that Carney has made some missteps. Looking at the Air Canada strike, people aren't necessarily, glowing when it comes to the Prime Minister and the Liberal government as a whole. So, of course, as any opposition politician is going to do, they're going to try to take advantage of that.
There's another, can I just say this?
Absolutely.
There's another aspect to this, right? It's the day after the by-election, which was in Alberta, a place in the heartland of Alberta that has strongly voted for Conservatives. There's part of the new constituency that he's representing that still wants to see a bit of the fire and the brimstone. If you remember the criticisms of Aaron O'Toole to a certain degree, and a lesser degree to Andrew Scheer, previous leaders of the Conservative Party, where they got a little too wishy-washy too quickly. So he's trying to balance that as well, again, to be fair to him. But I think if you're where I'm from in St. John's, or you're someone in Ontario and you're looking at this, you're like, it doesn't seem to add up. You say this and then you say that. And again, that is the challenge that he's got to navigate, keeping the people who elected him feeling like he's true to what he said he would be, while at the same time demonstrating that he can be a serious leader for serious times.
But Stevie, is Cheryl right? Is this actually sort of an opportunity, though, because Mark Carney has made big promises, because expectations are so high that if you chip away at whether you're meeting those expectations, that message might eventually resonate?
I think that Carney has only had sort of 4 months since the election to enact a pretty ambitious agenda. And I think, while maybe not perfect on all fronts, has made some significant moves. We've had multiple FMMs, First Minister meetings. He's engaged in Europe. He's looking for new allies. He's having to navigate Trump, that first White House meeting. He landed that well. So I think we need to give Prime Minister Carney more time to see the fruits of his vision. I don't think anybody could have fixed all of the problems that were, outlined during the election in 4 months, and I think most Canadians agree with that. They trusted Carney to navigate us through this sort of economic crisis. They put their trust in him, and they're going to give him a little bit of time to roll out his plan.
Cheryl, you mentioned the proposals that, really are proposals we've heard before from Palev. Is that going to be a challenge or a problem for the Conservatives if they say their new way of opposing is also proposing, if it's stuff that much of which was sort of rejected during the spring election, and likely also some measures that the Liberals will not take on? Is that a problem if they don't come up with new things?
I mean, I suppose so, but at the same time, one of the things that Pierre Palev has been really kind of strong and strident on is the fact that he keeps saying, we won the debate. The Canadians liked our message. Ultimately, they didn't vote for the party because they had another alternative in the Liberals and Mark Carney, who said, we are going to do some of these same things. We're packaging them differently with a different messenger that people have seem to have much more affinity for. So it's not that that they should move off course of moving away from the core messages of, public safety, affordability, those types of things. People clearly care about them, but it's how they present them. So maybe it's coming through with different a different package, basically. Maybe it's putting different MPs to forefront them. Maybe that's the way to do it. But the fact that Pierre Palev has been out of the House, he's not going to be ceding that airtime anymore. So it will have to be, if they are going to keep the same message, they're going to have to tweak it.
Well, today he was out on crime, bail reform, and public safety. Tim, is that still a good wedge issue for them? Or because we've had now some bail reform, we have promises of new bail reform from Mark Carney, and they do seem to be on the same page on some of this. Is that still a useful wedge message?
Yeah, I think it is, because people in most places are not feeling as safe as they once did. So if Pierre Poilievre's strength when he was against Mr. Trudeau was he seemed to be able to connect with people on issues of affordability before the then Prime Minister could. And I think he can still do that on the issues of public safety. So people would be surprised if he wasn't talking about that. I would say the other thing, Karina, to be mindful of, part of proposing doesn't mean you're always proposing ideas that are going to fit perfectly. Part of what you're trying to do, you're the government in waiting, you're not the government. You at least need to demonstrate you have some ideas. People would expect them to have some degree of difference, I suspect. They can't be so rigid that they could never be seen to be accepted, but I don't think Pierre Poilievre is in that place. So I wouldn't expect his proposing means to be, here, Prime Minister, take this and do it. And when he has put ideas out there that Carney's like, he has taken them. For example, the carbon price, ending the carbon price, ending carbon taxation. So the good ones just get outright stolen. So that, maybe there's a whole law and order agenda there, Karina.
And then the credit seemed to, at least for that one, many Canadians are thanking Mark Carney for that and seem to forget where it originated. But Stevie, in terms of proposing new ideas, Palev was asked today about the contract dispute with Air Canada. We know that the Conservatives had this legislation they had been pushing again recently that would have, they say, taken care of unpaid work. But it's also come up, and I'm wondering if this could be a new idea from the Conservatives, even though they've not done it in the past when they were in government, is airline competition and allowing more foreign competition in to help make it so that Air Canada doesn't have such an impact if they are to have strikes and the like. Is that something that could be an idea that gets stolen then from the Liberals?
I agree with Tim that Carney is an efficient pragmatist. He will see a good idea, and if it's sort of ideologically still consistent with a Liberal platform, he will take it and he'll run with it. If it's good for the country, I think he will adopt measures. He's trying to deliver, and I think he has a vision. So maybe it's those reforms. I think he's focused on the Canadian domestic economy, and so if the calculation of greater competition would enhance Canadian industry or protect Canadians in any way, I think he'd need to see some hard statistics on that. But if it could advance, then I'm sure he and Jolie would be behind it.
I did want to ask you, you mentioned how there was this choose your own adventure moment today in the news conference where a reporter asked whether if the choice had been different, what he would have been like and what the country would have been like if he was Prime Minister. And he said, as you mentioned, he'd be building pipelines, expanding ports, getting concessions from President Trump. Do you think that message, Sherelle, will resonate with Canadians?
I don't know. When you're dealing with the U.S. president, it's hard to say anything definitive. I think it's probably foolish to say anything definitive simply because he changes on a dime. Palev today was saying that Mark Carney has basically gotten a worse deal. We're worse off with the president than we were before he came into office. I don't know if anybody else would be in a better position simply by virtue of dealing with Donald Trump. It is, of course, as an opposition leader, something that you were, of course, going to, stand on and say, yes, I am absolutely would have been better. But I think that's part of the reason why he didn't form government is because the Canadian public didn't believe it at the time.
What do you think, Tim?
Well, he's not going to bring out the pom-poms and say, yeah, you're doing great, Mark Carney, you're the man, woo, high five. Donald Trump may do that separately with his friends. I think you're going to see Pierre Palev, find ways to offer critique even when he's trying to lend support. But I go back to his audience right now. Look, what are we, August 20th today? Other than the wonderful viewership of this show, there aren't a hell of a lot of people that are still paying attention to politics. So he can test drive messages as well at this moment to see where they resonate. The more particular audience that's important for him is still his own party membership who just saw him get reelected, so they want to know he's true to them first, because all us Ottawa elites are saying you got to change your message, and that's wrong.
We only have a couple minutes left. Stevie, in terms of that message and whether it resonates, is it conceivable that Canadians, since the Conservatives want to broaden even the 8 extra million votes they got this election, I was talking with Melissa Lansman yesterday, and she was saying, we need to actually even broaden that base further, especially if they want to form government. So is a message like that going to help them towards that, if he's talking about how he would have done better with Trump if he was Prime Minister?
I think the likely sequence of competitions that Palev is going to have to win coming up starts with a leadership review. And his tonality, the messaging, I think it's really to that outcome that he is focused on. He needs to remain in leader in order to have the opportunity to expand the base in the next general. I think this is somewhat of a perennial problem with Conservatives, is that to win leadership or maintain leadership, you have to have a certain level of, you have to have certain messaging, you have to land certain points as to the base. The Liberals listen to that and then can pull that and use it against them in the general. So I think he's, navigating that right now, and we'll probably, unfortunately, hear more of the same slogan-based, answers that we did in 2024.
Yeah, it's a hard line to walk for most Conservative leaders. That certainly done some of them in because of that difficulty. Thank you for coming and for giving me your perspectives. The Power Panel, Stevie O'Brien, Tim Powers, and Sherelle Evelyn. I'm Karina Roman, filling in for David Cochrane. Thank you for watching Power and Politics. There's more ahead on CBC News Network. Stay right there.